Hello everyone. So in this video, we will discuss the Indian economy and agriculture questions from your mains GS3 paper of 2025. The idea is not to provide you model answers, but rather to discuss how to approach the questions in the exam hall. All right, let's get started. So the first question is distinguish between Human Development Index and Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index with special reference to India, and why is IHDI considered a better indicator for inclusive growth? Okay. So straightforward, you want to underline the keywords because that is going to help you answer the question. Now, the keywords, of course, here is Human Development Index and Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, and to distinguish between them. Now, for all your answers that you write for your mains examination, the broad structure has to be a small intro, then the body of the question where the main demands of the question are satisfied, and then a conclusion which can be a forward-looking conclusion, looking into the future, what can be the way forward. All right. So the answer will have an intro, a body, and conclusion. Now, the main demands of the question are satisfied in the body. Now, what are your straightforward? You have to identify what are the main demands of the question. So the demand of the question is to distinguish. First part is to distinguish between HDI and IHDI, and then you have to justify it with a special reference to India and why IHDI is considered a better indicator. So that is the main demand of the question. So that will come in the body, the difference between HDI and IHDI and relevance of IHDI for India. Okay. And then you can conclude with why inequality adjusted HDI is considered a better indicator that you can address in the conclusion. Okay. Now, for introduction, you have generally have various options to write various kinds of introduction. Okay, now the question itself gives you an idea of what kind of introduction can be written, right? For example, this question is talking about Human Development Index and inequality adjusted Human Development Index. So kind of introduction can be how our understanding of development have evolved over the years. So a historical introduction also works here, I think. Like you can start with our understanding of development has evolved from focusing solely on wealth to viewing it from multiple dimensions. Okay, so earlier the idea of development was solely focusing on the GDP or GNP or the economic growth rate. Now our idea of development has evolved and we focus on various dimensions. Creation of Human Development Index by UNDP marks a shift towards more inclusive view of development. Now the IHDI is continuation of our understanding by taking inequalities also into account. Okay, so this can be a good introduction from a historical perspective, how our understanding of development have evolved. Another type of introduction can be very statistical introduction. If you have data regarding India's position vis-a-vis rest of the world in HDI, IHDI, so you can use statistics also, right? Data also. So this introduction also works. According to UNDP report, India ranks 134 out of 193 countries with a HDI of 0.644. So if you have this data, this is a very good introduction. Now this marks improvement from earlier years. However, now you introduce IHDI. India's IHDI is 0.444, indicating a nearly 30% loss in human development due to inequality. So using data, this can be a very good introduction and straight away sets the context for the context in which this question has been asked. Now, another type of introduction can be very straightforward definition-based introduction. So you can just define what is HDI, IHDI. Okay, so if you don't have data or you don't have a historical understanding of how this has come to be, straightforward definition also works. So Human Development Index is a composite measure of countries' achievement in three key dimensions. Now, this I expect all of you to know at least Human Development Index you should be aware of. So three key dimensions: health, education, and standard of living. However, it assumes uniform distributions of these factors across the population, and then inequality adjusted human development index addresses this limitation by adjusting the HDI to reflect the disparities. Okay, so any type of introduction works. So I just wanted to show you that there need not be just one introduction. There can be various types of introductions that you can write. Okay. Then the body is where the demands of the question is addressed. So the demand of the question is to distinguish between HDI and IHDI, show its the relevance of IHDI for India, and then show how IHDI is a better indicator. All right. So you can usually divide it into subheadings. So you can write a subheading difference between HDI and HDI and address this. So the difference between HDI and IHDI is, again, you'll have to go into the details of it. So HDI considers three dimensions: health, education, standard of living, and the average of that gives you the Human Development Index. But it does not take into account the inequalities that are there across each of these dimensions. So inequalities in health, access to health, inequalities in access to education, inequalities in standard of living in the country. And therefore, IHDI takes care of these inequalities, also considers inequalities in each of these dimensions. And the greater the difference between HDI and IHDI, greater will be the level of inequality in the country. So why IHDI is better is straightforward. It is a more realistic measure of development in the country. So it gives a true picture of the level of development in the country by also taking into account the inequalities. Now, why is it relevant for India? Because, of course, India is a highly unequal country. There are regional disparities. So here, so you can show various dimensions of inequalities that are there in India. So there are regional inequalities. You can also use examples here and also some data. If you have, that will be very useful for you. For example, you can show that there are inequalities between southern states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and maybe northern states, backward northern states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha. Even if you have some data, for example, you can show that the infant mortality rate in Kerala is only 7, whereas the infant mortality rate in Bihar is 42. So if you have this kind of data, very good. Then another dimension are the socioeconomic inequalities that exist in the country. So you can add a few lines about inequalities along the lines of caste, religion, gender, um, even the tribals and non-tribals. So there is inequality between them on the basis of abilities and disabilities. So these are the various dimensions of inequalities, which is measured by Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index and ignored by Human Development Index. And also one of the very important relevance of IHDI is that it will help in policy guidance in the country. Only when you have proper data, policy can be guided, policy more efficient policy making can be done. Okay, so this is how you can write the body, and the conclusion can be a forward looking conclusion. Always good to write a forward good looking conclusion. So you can write that for India to achieve the status of Viksit Bharat by 2047. So that is the larger goal towards which we are working with Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas, right? So this uh, uh, highlights the element of inclusivity while achieving this status of developed country. So with Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas, IHDI offers a more accurate measure of inclusive growth, highlighting the inequalities and guiding policies for equitable development. So this can be a very good answer for this question. The next question is, what are the challenges before the Indian economy when the world is moving away from free trade and multilateralism to protectionism and bilateralism? How can these challenges be met? All right. So again, you want to underline the keywords. Now, these are the demands of the question. So the demands of the question will be met in the body. So in the body, you'll have the challenges for the Indian economy that is there when the world is moving away from free trade towards more protectionism, and how can these challenges be met? So these are the key demands of the question which will be met in body. Now again, I'm showing this here just for your convenience. Of course, when you write the answer, of course, you'll be writing the intro first, then the body, then the conclusion. Now, in this question, it is a very relevant questions from the current context. Okay, it is a overall broader change that is happening, and therefore you can have a very current affairs based introduction for this. So a good introduction for this can be just setting the context in which this question has been asked. So in the wake of the US-China trade war, COVID-19, the ongoing geopolitical conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war, countries worldwide have started adopting protectionist measures. And India, as the fastest growing large economy, of course, will face significant challenges due to these shifts. So this can be a good introduction. It also sets the context for answering this question. Now in the body, you'll have the challenges for Indian economy. So what are the challenges for Indian economy? Of course, as the countries move towards more protectionism, more bilateralism, there will be greater trade barriers. Okay, as you can see with the higher tariffs that has been imposed by recently by America. Also, in general, the tariffs has been increasing. So the higher tariffs and also non-tariff barriers that are being created. Okay, non-tariff barriers like certain protectionist measures of phyto and non phytosanitary measures that are there for various products. So those are non-tariff barriers also. There is also supply chain disruption due to various geopolitical conflicts in Russia-Ukraine war and conflicts in the Middle East. There are various supply chain disruption happening. So it affects India's exports and participation in international trade. So that is again a challenge for the Indian economy. And overall, it creates a lower external demand. Okay. Uh, the demand the demand for Indian exports reduces in the international market, and again that will affect the Indian economy. You can also talk about decreasing FDI. Okay, so investment also. So external demand is also decreasing, but the cross-border investments are also decreasing. So you can talk about that there. Now, what about meeting the challenges? What can be done to meet these challenges? Of course, once you have identified the problem, the solutions can become can appear to be very apparent. So what can be done to meet this challenge? Of course, India would like to diversify its export market, not just depend on the traditional export market like the European or the American markets, but rather diversify, look more towards Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia. These sort of markets can be looked into. Then India would also like to strengthen its domestic economy because external economy is very volatile. So, agar external international trade is well volatile external economy, so we can no longer depend on the external market on other countries to drive demand in our country, and therefore we'll have to strengthen the domestic economy. And again, you can add a few points on how we can strengthen the domestic economy. Major recommendations would be that was also there in your economic survey: deregulation, greater ease of doing business, right? And you can also talk about PLI schemes and all. And then another solution can be more bilateral trade agreements, because now the World Trade Organization is somewhat failing in its mandate. Therefore, India will also need to do bilateral trade agreements with different countries. And you can also use examples of the recent India, UK, India, UAE trade agreements, even India, Australia trade agreement, and the ongoing negotiations with European Union. So those sort of things you can utilize here. And the conclusion, of course, the conclusion can always be a little forward looking, going forward, what India needs to do. And this word is very important, can be used in a lot of answers. India needs to adopt a multi-pronged approach, which means it has to work in different dimensions, right? So it needs to balance the needs of the economy while keeping in mind the global trends. So the need of the economy is high rates of growth. तो उसके लिए domestic economy strengthen karo, do bilateral agreements, diversify your export market, while at the same time not depend on international trade totally. Also look inwards. So that is how you can approach this question. All right. Next question is from agriculture. So usually the first two questions are from Indian economy, 10 markers, and the next two questions are from agriculture. So this question is explain the factor influencing the decision of farmers on the selection of high value crops in India. Okay. So very straightforward question. Also, agriculture remains a very uh, good high marks yielding subject because वहाँ पे the amount of coverage that you have to do is quite low as compared to maybe Indian economy or some of the other subjects. But the number of questions that are asked from agriculture is high. So, and also a lot of questions directly picked from your syllabus or previous year questions. So in fact, this question also is in parts has been already been asked in the previous years. So changes in cropping patterns and all those questions are very similar. Okay, so here the question is asking factors influencing decision of farmers on selection of high value crops. So you have to list the factors. So that will become part of your body. So what are the various factors? You can broadly divide it into demand side factors and supply side factors. Okay, so this will come in your body. Your introduction for this question can be again a little historic, because why farmer is moving towards high value crops. You can say that historically dominated by rice and wheat production. Now India's agriculture is shifting towards high value crops due to various factors, right? Rising disposable income, increasing dietary awareness, creating new opportunities for farmers. So this can be a good introduction. If you have some data also, data regarding how much high value crops are being grown or what are the various high value crops, you can use that also. So I just want to tell you that there is no specific introduction that you have to write. You can, according to your knowledge, can write different type of introductions. Now the body, of course, has to satisfy the demand of the question. So the question is asking factors influencing decision of farmers. So broadly, you can divide it into demand side factors and supply side factors, but even without dividing, you can straight away start stating the different factors. Okay. So the demand side factors, of course, is that it fetches high market price. Okay. So the high value crops have my high market price. So the remuneration is higher. Also, the demand is growing because Indian economy is growing, which means the households are becoming more prosperous. They have more disposable income, and therefore now they are demanding high value crops. Okay. Also, there is greater consumer preference towards high value crops. This can be attributed to more awareness on social media, more influencers, suggesting more healthier options. Also, just more demand for different varieties of, and also as exposure to the international community increases, people also learn about more different type of high value crops that are there. And also these high value crops have high export potential. So this also you can talk about. On the supply side, there are various factors. For example, the agroclimatic factors are there. Different parts of India, different regions of India supports growth of these high value crops. For example, you can talk about Ratnagiri mangoes in the Ratnagiri area, or apples in the Himachal, or tea, coffee. These are also high value crops. You can also talk about floriculture. Floriculture was discussed in the economic survey at length. So that is also a high value crop with high export potential. So you can talk about that. Then you can talk about availability of technology. So with availability of technology and irrigation facilities, particularly micro irrigation like drip irrigation or sprinkler irrigation, uh, farmers can do precision agriculture, right? And precision agriculture is very important for growing of high value crops. And again, you can talk about availability of infrastructure. यहाँ पे you can also mention some of the government schemes which is leading to availability of infrastructure like cold chains, refrigerated storage, uh, more efficient logistics, all those that are there, like Kisan Rail, you can talk about. So various infrastructure that is there. So these are the various factors that is encouraging farmers to grow more high value crops. And in the conclusion, again, the conclusion can be a forward-looking conclusion that to double the farmer's income. So we have always been talking about doubling the farmer's income. So it directly becomes relevant here to double farmers' income and ensure sustainable growth of the country. India must support the shift to high value crops. And it also leads to more job creation outside of agriculture. So we require more and more jobs outside of agriculture. The high value crops के लिए there will be more jobs because there will be food processing, there will be more jobs in the logistics sectors, transportation, warehousing, marketing. So those jobs will be created outside of agriculture to reduce dependency and promote overall development. Okay. So this will nicely tie up your answers. So this can be a good answer to this question. All right. Next question is again from agriculture. Elaborate the scope and significance of supply chain management of agricultural commodities in India. Now, again, this question directly lifted from your syllabus point has already been asked in the previous years. So again, there is no excuse to not write a good answer here. Okay. The question is asking scope and significance of supply chain management of agriculture's commodities. So that is the demand of the question. So you'll have to write about scope of supply chain management and significance of supply chain management. In the introduction, again, the introduction, it is talking about supply chain management. So you can just define what is supply chain management. So supply chain management in agriculture refers to the process of efficiently managing the flow of agriculture commodities from farm production to the end consumer delivery. Now, in India, the effective supply chain management is more crucial because to ensure food security, there are so many people living in India. To ensure food security, reduce wastage because a lot of post-harvest losses is being experienced in India. So, क्योंकि these are perishable products, agriculture products. So, to reduce wastage and to enhance farmers' income, supply chain management is necessary. So, this can be a good introduction. In the body, in the scope of supply chain management, you can talk about the all the scope. So, right from procurement to storage and transportation of agriculture commodities, also market linkages. So access to market. So access to market, you can also talk about digital access to market like ENAM here. Okay. Or model APMC Act or uh, or different innovations has been done with respect to market linkage. Also, you can talk about these online platforms like Blinkit uh, uh, these fresh farm foods that are being provided. So that also you can talk about. In tech integration, you can talk about different technologies that are being used for efficient supply chain management. So technology for in marketing, but also technology for the whole logistics. So technology I also can talk about. For significance of supply chain management, what is the significance? Of course, it leads to reduce wastage. If you have some data regarding the amount of post-harvest losses that are there in India, so that will really help in enhancing the quality of this answer. So you can talk about reducing wastage. You can talk about enhancing the income of farmers and also the end consumers, right? So even because the supply chain management, you can also talk about how efficient supply chain management reduces the dependence on middlemen, right? Which means more remuneration to the farmers, but also lesser price for the end consumers. So consumer welfare will also happen. And with efficient supply chain management, more exports of agriculture produce can also be done. So this will satisfy the demands of your question. And in conclusion, of course, you can have a very simple conclusion that as India seeks to enhance agriculture productivity and export potential. So forward looking in future, what we are planning to do. So we want to increase agriculture productivity. We want to increase export potential. Strengthening the supply chain management will be pivotal. All right. So this is a good answer for this question. The next question is explain how the fiscal health index can be used as a tool for assessing the fiscal performance of states in India. In what way would it encourage the state to adopt prudent and sustainable fiscal policies? All right. So again, this question is talking about the fiscal health index and how it can be used as a tool for assessing the fiscal performance of states. Okay. So straightforward, even if you don't know what fiscal health index is, right? Even then you can gauge what it is, because it is talking about being a tool used for assessing the fiscal performance of states. So the definition is already there in the question. Okay. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि if you have missed some current affairs and you don't know the latest development or some new instrument that has been developed by some government institution, that you have to ignore the question, or leave the question. Still look at what clues are there regarding that in the question itself. Okay, so it's talking about fiscal health index, and then how will it encourage states to adopt more prudent and sustainable fiscal policies. Okay, so there are two demands of this question. One is how fiscal health index is being used to assess the fiscal performance, and how will it encourage to the states to adopt prudent and sustainable fiscal policies. So these two demands will be met in the body of the answer. Now, in the introduction, if you think about it, it has introduced a term fiscal health index, and therefore in the introduction, always a good idea to go with a definition-based introduction. So you can talk about the fiscal health index is a tool designed by NITI Aayog to evaluate and monitor the fiscal performance of states. So very straightforward. If you know what fiscal health index is, and NITI Aayog, if you know about NITI Aayog, which has designed this index, then you can go with this. If you have some more data regarding the fiscal health index, definitely you can put that in the intro. Now in the body, how FHI will be used to assess fiscal performance. So of course, if the fiscal health index is assessing the fiscal performance, it is looking at the revenue of the states, the expenditure of the states, also the debt to GDP ratio and the fiscal deficits and all the other deficits, is looking at that. And also because this is a fiscal health index, it is publishing all that information on a platform, therefore leading to more transparency and more accountability for the states also. So you can talk about all that, how it will use, how will it reflect the revenue generation status of the states, expenditure management of the state, so that the debt to GDP ratio is sustainable, kept within a limit, and also the fiscal deficit. So leading to more fiscal consolidation of the states, and overall leading to transparency and accountability. Now, how will it encourage prudent and sustainable fiscal policies? Of course, once you have data regarding the fiscal health of the states, then the states can do policy reforms. Also, the center can push the states to do policy reforms. There will be greater fiscal discipline, more targeted fiscal policy, competitive federalism. So there will be a healthy competition between states to attain a higher rank in the fiscal health index, and that will give rise to better overall better financials for all the states. So these are the things you can talk about. So you see, in general, even if you don't know a few words in the question, a few terms like fiscal health index, even then you actually are aware about the discussions regarding fiscal sustainability and uh, fiscal consolidation. So if you are aware of that, you can easily attempt this question. Now, in the conclusion, of course, you can sum up and also have a forward-looking conclusion. So you can write, by encouraging states to adopt sound fiscal policies, FHI can promote long-term fiscal stability of the country overall and of all the states, efficient resource management, sustained economic growth, aligning with India's vision of becoming a developed economy of 2047. So this is a forward-looking conclusion if you can give. Of course, if you have more data, like you can talk about states account for 2/3 of the total expenditure that is done in India, and also accounts for 1/3 of the total revenue that is that is generated. So if you have these data, you can definitely use them. All right. Next question is, and again, very expected questions, because production linked incentive scheme has been discussed a lot in the economic survey also, and has in general been in news. So the question is, discuss the rationale of PLI schemes. What are its achievements? In what way can the functioning and outcome of the scheme be improved? So there are three demands of the question. First, it is asking about the rationale of PLI scheme, the achievements of PLI scheme, and how it can be improved. Okay. So again, your body will have all the three subheadings: rationale of PLI scheme, achievements of PLI scheme, and improvements in functioning and outcomes. Okay. Now, again, in the introduction, because this has introduced a term, production linked incentive scheme, so you can start by defining what exactly is PLI schemes. Okay. So I think you can write PLI scheme introduced by the government of India. If you know the year also, well and good, in 2022, but at least you should know what PLI scheme is doing. And it is what was introduced to boost the domestic manufacturing and attracting investment in certain key sectors, right? There were 13, 14 key sectors that the government identified in which PLI scheme was implemented. So in key sectors, providing financial incentives. So how does it work? By providing incentives like rebates, subsidies, tax incentives to companies based on their incremental production. So this can be a good introduction. Now in the body, of course, you want to one by one satisfy the different demands of the question. So you can give subheadings. What are the rationale of PLI scheme? Of course, rationale of PLI scheme is that by giving incentives, it will lead to boost or to domestic manufacturing, also attract investment. And once you boost domestic manufacturing, attract more investment, it will have various benefits like creating of more jobs, increasing the export potential of the sector. So all these benefits are there. So this is the rationale. Okay. You can add more points here if you think of something. Then what are the achievements of PLI scheme? Of course, PLI schemes has various achievements. We have already been talking about so much of mobile phones being produced in India. Now, Apple has invested in India. Samsung has invested in India. Many big companies, multinational companies have now started investing. So the various achievements you can talk about, and if you also have the data, well and good. So increased investment, you can also give examples of Apple, Samsung, creation of more jobs, increase in exports in certain key sectors. You can talk about IT, pharmaceuticals, semiconductor, electronics. So these are the key sectors in which India has improved a lot. Okay. There are also very good case studies given in your economic survey. And that is why I say time and again that economic survey remains very important for your examination, both for your prelims exam and your mains exam. Now you want to give some improvements in functioning. Okay. How can PLI scheme be further improved? Okay. And PLI scheme can be further improved. Improvement के you already know. किसी में भी improve करना, obviously you want a wider coverage. So introduce PLI schemes for other sectors also, which is right now not being covered. Better monitoring of increase in production. And also you can introduce certain other things like element of skill development in the PLI scheme. You can also link employment with the incentives, right? So we have been talking about moving from production linked incentive to employment linked incentive. So employment linked incentive you can also talk about here. So that will be a good answer. And in conclusion, again, you can have a good overall summing up and a forward-looking conclusion for this question as well. So you can talk about India's manufacturing sector, how it has faced challenges of low productivity, inadequate infrastructure, high import dependence, and with PLI scheme is crucial for accelerating growth, boosting competitiveness, and addressing the structural weaknesses. Okay, so you can also talk about India becoming a manufacturing hub going forward. India um, um, attaining the status of developed country or Viksit Bharat. So those are the things you can also talk about, and how PLI scheme is an important scheme towards that goal. All right, next question is examine the factors responsible for depleting groundwater in India. All right, very straightforward. What are the steps taken by government to mitigate such depletion of groundwater? So again, very straightforward question. And also this question, elements of this question has been there in the previous year questions also. A lot of quite a few questions has been asked on depleting groundwater. So this shouldn't come as a surprise question, very along the very expected lines. And there are two demands of the question: factor responsible for depleting groundwater and the steps taken by government. Okay, so those two will obviously come in the body: factor responsible for groundwater and steps taken by the government. And in the introduction, you can talk about why it is such a crucial issue for the government. And if you have some data, again, that will be very useful. So you can start with 60%. If you have this data, well and good. 60% of India's irrigation needs are met by groundwater, be it tube wells or bore wells or open wells. 60% of the irrigation is met by groundwater. And a declining water table poses a threat to agriculture also, threat to our drinking water availability and overall sustainability. So that's a very short introduction you can write. It also sets the context for the question. So why depleting groundwater is so important an issue for India. Now, factors responsible for groundwater depletion. Again, there are various factors, right? For example, excessive water extraction. Here you can also talk about availability of power, subsidized power to the farmers, availability of other facilities at a subsidized rate. So that leads to excessive water extraction. Also, water intensive crop, and many areas where the groundwater table is not very high, even those area grow water intensive crops. Again, due to various factors like MSPs, which leads to growing of water intensive crops in water deficit areas. For example, you're growing rice in Haryana and Punjab, or growing sugarcane in Maharashtra region, all that can lead to depletion of groundwater. Then there is also lack of efficient irrigation. Majority of the irrigation system till now is very inefficient. We have not yet moved towards micro irrigation, which is efficient. So अभी भी बहुत ज़्यादा flood irrigations होता है. So that leads to again depletion of groundwater. Also leads to contamination, because inefficient irrigation will lead to running off of fertilizers or pesticides. So contaminate भी हो रहा है. And overall, there is a trend. There is climate change that is happening, urbanization, which is again leading to a lot more pressure on the groundwater, and industrialization. So these are the various things you can talk about in fact, is responsible for groundwater depletion. Now, what are the steps taken by the government? Now, here you should also know what are the various government programs and what are the various initiatives that the government has taken. So, if you already know this, you can talk a lot about it. So, like the Amrut scheme, Jal Jeevan Mission is there, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana is there, and a very important component of Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana is per um, per drop more crop, right? So that is there where the government is incentivizing or encouraging farmers to adopt micro irrigation, specifically drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, all that. So that is again there. And then there are various community-based water conservation programs, groundwater recharge, Jal Shakti Abhiyan is there. So if you know these schemes, then you can easily write it here. Steps taken by the government to mitigate such depletion of groundwater. And in the conclusion, again, you want a forward-looking conclusion going forward. What is the importance of groundwater and why is it so crucial? Okay, so maybe you can write talk about India. India with 17%, around 17% of world's population has only 4% of global freshwater resources, right? So you see the pressure on the availability of freshwater resources is quite high, and therefore faces immense pressure on its groundwater. Now, to ensure sustainable water availability, continued efficient water management, conservation, innovative solutions, these are very crucial to safeguard India's future. Okay, so this is a good conclusion. This way you can tackle this question. Next question is again a very straightforward question the from agriculture. This question is directly lifted from the syllabus and has also been asked in the previous years. So again, a very expected question. The question is examine the scope of food processing industries in India. Elaborate the measures taken by the government in food processing industries for generating employment opportunities. Okay. So the first part of the question is scope of food processing industries. So that is the first demand of the question. And second is measures taken by the government. Okay. So again, these two will be the major portion of your body, scope of food processing industry and measures taken by the government. Now, in the introduction, again, you can start by defining either defining the food processing industries or also setting the context of why food processing is so important. Okay. So India is the one of the largest producers of food products globally. However, a significant portion of the food is damaged or destroyed, uh, right? So post-harvest losses are quite high in India. Now, food processing industries offers a solution to reduce wastage, enhance farmers' income, and create employment opportunities. So there are very simple introduction you can give. If you also have some data regarding how much jobs food processing industry generate, then well and good, right? For example, you can say that around 12% of the manufacturing jobs is actually created by the food processing industry. So if you have this data, definitely that will enhance the quality of your answer. Now in the body, again, two subheadings: scope of the food processing industry, measures taken by the government. Okay, now what is the scope of food processing industry? Now here you can talk about various scope that is there. Market potential of food processing. Now, as India is growing economically, the households are becoming wealthier. And when households become wealthier, they have more disposable income and they're going to demand higher quality food products. So processing food is processed food becomes a very important component. So market potential is there. Also export potential. Once the food processing is done, there is greater demand in the international market for those processed food. For example, maybe some biscuits, some kind of biscuits, or some kind of tea or coffee. So these are all processed foods, right? So export demand, export potential is also there. Also potential for value addition. So this will also enhance the incomes of the farmers. Also will reduce the wastage. So these the raw material for food processing industries are agricultural products which are perishable. तो उनका वेस्टेज रिड्यूस होगा. With more processing, it increases the shelf life of those products and will also lead to a lot of rural employment. So rural population will find employment apart from agriculture, maybe in sorting the food product packaging, labeling, transport, storage. So a lot of even marketing. So lot of rural employment will be created. Now, what are some measures taken by the government? Again, here you should know all the measures that the government has taken for food processing industries. So the government is running various schemes like Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sampada Yojana is there, National Mission on Food Processing is there, creation of mega food parks, hub and spoke model, all that you can talk about. And also at the same time, various skill initiatives which are scaling particularly the SHG women, SHG members, and also the youth of the villages in various skills with regarding food processing. So all those initiatives you can talk about here. And in conclusion, you can underline the importance again of food processing industries and have a forward-looking conclusion that with India's growing need for non-farm employment, if you have data here, like the data is that 78.5 lakh jobs are required in non-farm sector every year. So that data you can give here, right? So growing need for non-farm employment, food processing industry can play a key role in generating jobs. And also very important because this food processing lies in the intersection between the agricultural sector and the manufacturing sector, and also very closely related to the rural economy. So therefore, it is even more important for creation of jobs in that area. And simultaneously also increases farmers' income. Focusing on the sector, India can improve food security, reduce wastage, work towards its goal of doubling the farmers' income in the future. So these are the points you can talk about. You can also talk about agripreneurs, right? The government of India does not want farmers to just passively engage in the farm. They also want them to become entrepreneurs. So agripreneur is the term that is a combination of agriculture and entrepreneur. So in the Niti Aayog report was there where it recommended farmers to also take up other forms of entrepreneurship and mostly in the food processing. तो वो भी बात कर सकते हैं and that will be quite a good answer. All right, so this brings us to the end of this video. Now, through this video, I wanted to tell you or show you how the questions in the mains examination can be approached. Now, going forward and looking at the questions, at least for the Indian economy and agriculture portion, I highly recommend at least a good base with one standard book that you can consult. And then for the dynamic portion, the economic survey remains the most important resource that is again highlighted in this year's question. So economic survey, which will be released next year, one day before the annual budget. The economic survey and the budget can be done together. And also a lot of practice, because unless you have proper practice of writing answers and thinking on your toe, on your toe, you won't be able to write answers utilizing the full word limit and within the time limit. So writing a lot of answers is very important. And for that, you can also take benefit of the test series that the UPSCprep.com is going to launch in the first week of September. So you can definitely take advantage of that. Thank you very much and have a good day.